Welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games, where we feed our people with relatable content, and our victory condition is your satisfaction. I'm Harry, and today we have another top 10 list for you all. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my top 10 board games that I absolutely suck at. 2 weeks ago, I made the opposite list. I shared with you the top 10 board games that I felt I was best at, that I felt I was actually quite good at. And it was hard to come across as if I was bragging, and I hope that's not what happened, because I actually don't consider myself to be a very good gamer from a competitive standpoint. I think I'm a good sport, and I have a good spirit and attitude about gaming, but I'm not necessarily successful in terms of wins and losses. And I find that it was very hard to make that list because there's not too many games that I consider myself to be good at. But there's a few more games in my collection that I do consider myself to be bad at. These are games that I do not win often enough. Some of these games I might have never won at. And even the games that I've been most successful, my percentage for how many times I've played these games is so low that it warrants these games making it onto this list. So without any further ado, let's move on to my number 10. My number 10 board game that I absolutely suck at is Lord of the Rings, the living card game, designed by Nate French and Fantasy Flight. And this is a Lord of the Rings themed game, as the title indicates, from the living card game line of games from Fantasy Flight, where players work cooperatively. This is a game for 2 players or solo. I think if you buy multiple boxes, you might be able to play 3 to 4 players. And players are going on different quests, different adventures, fighting monsters and bad guys from the Middle-earth Tolkien universe. Now, this game is a really cool game, really fun to play, and can get very deep as far as lifestyle type of games because there's so much content out for there. There's communities online that talk and discuss strategy and different deck construction options, thematically speaking, and just to optimize play and increase efficiency and winning percentages and all that stuff. Lots of people are really into this game. I like this game. I play this game quite often. And the reason why it's number 10 is because I do win at this game. However, there's lots of caveats. First of all, there are certain factions in this game that I have a really hard time winning at. Also, I've only played the base game, and I haven't even played the hardest scenario in the base game. I've only played the 2 easier scenarios in the base game, and I have a hard time believing that I would be able to win at the hardest scenario based on my current success. I do sometimes have to make lots of modifications to make the game easier, and I guess it's okay because it is a cooperative, a solo game, so as long as the players, or the player in my case, is having fun, that's all that matters. But again, it's just really hard for me to pick up consecutive victories in this game, and I've not won nearly at a rate that would make me feel confident saying that I'm even mediocre at this game, which is why it's my number 10 game that I suck at, Lord of the Rings, the living card game. Now we move on to my number 9 game that I suck at, and that's Robinson Crusoe, designed by Ignacy Trzewiczek and Portal Games here. And this is another cooperative game that could also be played solo, where players or a player take on the role of castaways on the Cursed Island. And this is a scenario-based game. The base game comes with 7 scenarios. If you purchase the expansions, it adds additional stories or scenarios for players to play through. And it's a very thematic, immersive experience of a game. And it's a game that is brutally infamous for how brutally difficult it can be. Most players tend to report having low winning percentages at this game, which is why I've ranked this game only number 9 on my list. I feel comforted by the fact that lots of people claim that they don't do very well at this game as well. So I have won at this game. I've played the first 2 scenarios, and I've won a couple of times at the first scenario, but again, I've had to make some modifications to make the game easy. For example, if I play solo, or even if I play with a partner, I make sure that Friday and the dog are coming along with us on these adventures, because it's so difficult for me to win otherwise. I also make some modifications for the event deck as the rules instruct. You add a few more of the question mark cards to the event deck and a few less of the book symbol cards on the event deck, and that makes the game a little bit easier. So I do make these modifications when I play. I have such an enjoyable time. I play this game for the experience, for the immersiveness, and for the challenge of trying to crack this puzzle and make as good decisions as possible. And that's why I play this game, but I definitely do not play because I feel like I'm good at it. My number 9 board game that I absolutely suck at, Robinson Crusoe. And now we move on to my number 8 board game that I absolutely suck at. Another one that I love, and that's Thunderstone Quest, designed by Mike Elliott. This is the 3rd iteration of this game design, published by AEG Games. And this is a deck building fantasy themed game that at this point, at this 3rd edition, the Quest edition, it actually feels like a dungeon crawl fantasy adventure in deck building form. And I enjoy the game so much for this. And it's so cool because it represents all the different classes and races that are typical in fantasy lore. And from that perspective, from a immersive, thematic perspective, it's always so enjoyable. However, I don't win very much at this game, and I've played this game with a good amount of people. I play it 2 players, 3 players, 4 players, and I just do not win. I've won a few times, maybe 3 times if I'm counting correctly, but not nearly as much as I should based on how much I play this game. Again, very enjoyable. One of my favorite deck building games. One of my favorite games, period, of all time. I just wish that I would win more at it. My number 8 deck building game, not deck building, sorry. My number 8 game that I absolutely suck at, Thunderstone Quest. Now we move on to my number 7. And my number 7 board game that I absolutely suck at is pretty recent to me. I haven't been playing it for too long. And that's Keyforge, designed by Richard Garfield. And again, this is another card game, tactical card game from Fantasy Flight and their catalog, their line of games. And this game is a really cool, neat, tactical 2-player card game. Very much like Magic the Gathering in a sense, where you're placing cards and rotating them 90 degrees to indicate that they've been used, and engaging in some combat with your opponent. This is from the same designer as Magic the Gathering, Richard Garfield. However, this game differs because the ultimate objective is not knocking down your heroes or your opponent's health down to 0. While knocking down their individual character's health is very helpful, the goal of this game is to collect this resource referred to as Ember, which you use to build your different keys, and the player to unlock or build 3 of their keys first is the winner of the game. Now, it's really cool because the damage that's done to the different creatures in this game is cumulative. Unlike Magic the Gathering, where all that damage must be done in one spot, this is done throughout the course of several turns. And the neatest thing is the gimmick of this, which is unique player decks. Every player gets a unique deck. The base game comes with 2 standard decks that all copies share, but other than that, every time you buy a booster pack, it's a unique computer generated deck that has a different configuration of 3 different factions. There's so many different factions in this Keyforge universe, but each deck combines a different set of 3 and a different group of cards from within those different factions. And it's so cool because you've got that uniqueness to figure out. And on your turn, you're choosing one of those 3 factions, and then you can play as many of those cards from your player area and from your hand as possible that match that chosen faction. So you really kind of have to map out your turns and hopefully build up. So in future rounds, you can have very powerful turns where you can choose a faction that you have a lot of cards for. Really cool, really fun, really strategic. I feel sometimes that I figure the game out, but for whatever reason, when I play other people, I am not successful and I do not end up with a W, which is why I'm ranking this as my number 7 board game that I absolutely suck at, Keyforge. My number 6 board game that I absolutely suck at is a Game of Thrones, the living card game. So again, this is a living card game or a tactical card game from Fantasy Flight's catalog. And I'm a huge fan of these Fantasy Flight LCGs and tactical card games. I'm a big fan. I own so many of them. I think I own almost all of them. And I enjoy that style of gameplay so much. You would think that I'd be better at it. But again, this is the 3rd of that style of game that you find on this list. This has the Game of Thrones IP. This game can take anywhere from 2 to 4 players. So you can play it multiplayer. Here's the thing. I've not played this game multiplayer. I've only played this game 2 players, and I've only played with 1 opponent. And while I am not going to rush to say that I'm good at a game, or if I've only played with 1 player, and I've beaten that player over and over again, I'm quicker to say that I suck at a game if I've only played against one player and have lost a lot against that player. Now, it could just be that that player is phenomenal. It's amazing. This is my friend Andrew, by the way. He might just be a really, really good player, and I'm not trying to take anything away from him, but I just get the impression that I'm not too good at this game. Every time I think I'm figuring something out from a strategic perspective, it just doesn't work. But from a gameplay perspective, this game is phenomenal. I really like this game. I like how the Game of Thrones theme comes out. I'm not the hugest Game of Thrones fan, but I appreciate some of the things that the intellectual property has to offer. And it's so cool because every round players are choosing an event card, and that event card governs certain parameters for that turn. First of all, it tells you how much money you can use for that turn. Money is not cumulative. It's not a cumulative currency. You are ever changing your money, and whatever money is not used in one round is thrown away. It's discarded. It's not saved for a future round. So playing those cards and trying to time when you play a card that's very valuable, that corresponds with a hand that perhaps has lots of valuable cards, that's all very key and essential. Not only do these event cards tell you how much money you get, but they also tell you the initiative. It's going to tell you who's going to go first in the order. The player with the highest initiative on their event card is going to go first. So sometimes a card might have low money value, but it might have high initiative value, and it's worth playing it in order to get that advantage of going first on that turn. Finally, these cards usually have some sort of additional action that's triggered, some sort of benefit to the player, perhaps a detriment to the opponent, sometimes even a detriment to the player playing it. It might be worth it for the high gold and initiative values to perhaps have something that will temporarily hinder you for that turn. After that, players are marshaling their characters, which is just a key turn for playing their characters down on their tableau. And then they're engaging in challenges with their opponents around the table in 3 different phases, in 3 different areas. You have military, you have intrigue, and you have power. And when you win in each of these battles, each of these challenges comes with a different type of reward. So you're playing your characters out based on which of those rewards are most valuable to you. And ultimately, the most valuable reward of them all is the power, because you win the game by having 15 power tokens at the end of the game. Really cool, really neat. The chess-like nature to this as you're making your decisions and trying to anticipate those of your opponent. Really cool, really neat, but for whatever reason, I cannot win at this game. My number 6 board game that I absolutely suck at, a Game of Thrones, the living card game. And now we move on to the top 5, the cream of the crop, or in my case, the games I suck at most. Because while I do suck at these games that I just finished mentioning, I have won multiple times at all of the games that I've mentioned. Some of the games that I'm about to mention, I have won once or maybe even no times at all. So let's move to my number 5, and my number 5 is The Pursuit of Happiness, a game of life, the board game. And this is a worker placement game where players are basically living out a life, simulating a life. First of all, they draft a character trait that determines how they first of all, it determines their starting resources, because there's a bunch of different resources in this game that you're managing. You're managing gold, you're managing influence, you're managing creativity, and you're managing knowledge. And all of these resources are very, very important for the different actions that you're going to take throughout the game. But you're also managing your workers, which come in the form of these sand timers to represent the fact that there just isn't enough time in life to do everything you want. And you're placing these sand timers in all the different spots on the board in order to trigger and activate their actions. And it's really cool because in this game, you do not necessarily block a action by placing your worker there. Opponents can go where you go, but technically you're blocking yourself, because if you ever place one of your workers in the same action twice within the same round, you accrue stress. And stress is a very negative and detrimental thing in this game, because the more stress you accrue, the worse your health will be, and the more likely you will not live to old age, which means you won't play the full game. There is player elimination in this game of sorts, not in the sense that you lose the game, but once your character dies because they've hit old age and they're too stressed to go deep into old age, then you will get no more actions for the rest of the game. And yes, you might win if hopefully the opponents who are still around don't do enough actions, successful actions to score or outscore you. But it's really cool, again, this stress mechanism and managing it. If you take too many projects, if you are involved in multiple romantic relationships, all these things can accrue stress. But there's so much fun things going on, so many different activities that you're partaking in, so many different projects, your rise and ascension in different professional careers, and your accumulation of different items, material things that perhaps bring you great joy, and maintaining those things from a monetary perspective. So many cool things to balance. I love the role play in this game. I love the imagination aspect, and I love the mechanisms, but for whatever reason, I cannot win. I think at most I might have won this game twice. I'm pretty sure I won it once, but I quite often lose it. And I've only played this game with my wife, Lily. She's my only opponent, but I can't seem to beat her. I guess she's better at this thing called life than I am. Go figure. My number 5 board game that I absolutely suck at, The Pursuit of Happiness. And now we move on to my number 4, and my number 4 is In the Year of the Dragon, designed by Steppenfeld and Ravensburger Games. And I must say that out of the 10 games in this list, this is by far the game that I least care about. I like this game okay. Most of these games I love. So don't get it twisted. Just because I'm not good at them does not mean I don't enjoy them greatly. In the Year of Dragon, I like okay. I play this to indulge my wife. She's the only person that I play this game at. And again, it has nothing to do with my success in this game, because I very lack success in all these other games, and yet I love them greatly and dearly. However, in the Year of the Dragon, it's just meh for me. It's a little bit antiquated in its design, and I'm not the biggest fan of its production quality and its look on the table. But this game is about recreating the Year of the Dragon, which is a year of calamities. Basically, the game consists of 12 rounds corresponding with the 12 months of the year. The first 2 rounds are easy. They're freebies. Nothing really bad happens. But for the last 10 rounds of the game, there's something terrible happening. But you know exactly what's going to happen for each month, so you can take the necessary actions to try to prevent them. Here's the thing. It's impossible to prevent them all. You will suffer casualties for some of these terrible events. You just got to know which ones you're going to do it for. And for whatever reason, I cannot succeed. I think one of the reasons is that I become obsessed with the game within the game. This is the first time that Steppenfeld introduced this kind of game within the game mechanism of controlling or manipulating turn order. And I am so obsessed with going first that I think I make most of my decisions on the basis of how can I maintain turn order? How can I still be first? And Lily always wins at this game. I've beaten Lily 1 time. Now, I will admit the games for the most part are usually very, very close in score. More often than not, Lily only beats me by 1, 2, 3 points. Every once in a while, she might have a 5-point game or victory, but I've only been able to beat her once. So it's hard to not say that I absolutely suck at this game. My number 4 game that I suck at in the Year of the Dragon. My number 3 board game that I absolutely suck at is Shadowrift, designed by Jeremy Anderson. And this is a fantasy-themed deck building game, cooperative game, or solo. I mostly play solo. And this game is so cool for so many reasons. First of all, there's so many little deck building games within the deck building game taking place, because not only are you manipulating your own player deck, which starts typically as most deck building games with very weak cards. Not only are you going to the market in order to acquire different hero cards and different skills and different spells and different items that will strengthen your deck and increase your chances of defeating and fighting the bad guys, but you're also manipulating the bad guy deck, the evil deck, the enemy deck, because there are cards that you play that allow you to put cards back in the deck, to flip them, or take the top card, reveal it, and put it back on the bottom. So you're manipulating the enemy deck. All the while, you're also manipulating the town deck, because the board consists of a deck of town cards that you're trying to strengthen up, because the end game trigger is whenever your town deck or your town space, which is 5 spaces, is filled with 5 cards and none of them are villagers, you have lost the game. And there's corpses and there's infiltrators that are coming into your village, and any of those occupy, if 5 of those cards occupy your town spaces, you've lost this game. And as the game goes on, the enemies are picking apart like flies. They're picking off all your different villagers. So you got to keep on going back and accruing more villagers. You also have to buy walls that help protect you from your enemies, because these are all cards that help fill out these town spaces and slow down and prevent the end game condition. But ultimately, what you want to do is you want to play your Shadowrift cards in order to close the rift and ultimately win the game. And I think you have 2 Shadowrifts that you need to close in order to win the game if you're playing a solo game. This game is so challenging and so difficult. The reason why I put it number 3 is because I have won at this game. However, every time I win, I make modifications. I make adjustments in order to make the game a little bit easier, because I have such a hard time winning, even with those adjustments. And I don't even want to imagine how hard it would be if I tried playing this game exactly as the rules read. I have high hopes that one day I will figure out a strategy that will be successful and I'll be able to take off the training wheels and do better at this game. But from a design perspective, from a mechanism perspective, I appreciate it so much. It might be a little convoluted. It might have a lot going on compared to your typical, more streamlined deck building experience. And this is definitely not the game you want to use to introduce people to the deck building genre. But if you don't mind your games to be a little fiddly, a little convoluted, with a lot going on, but at the same time very rich and deep from a strategic perspective, then this is a game you've got to consider. My number 3 board game that I absolutely suck at, Shadowrift. And now we move on to my number 2. And my number 2 is Xenoshyft. And this here's the Onslaught, the original edition from Command Games. This is another deck building game. This is another solo or cooperative game. And this is another game. This game is actually a tower defense. You're basically defending your tower from the onset of all these aliens in the form of large insects that are attacking your base. And based on the player count, your tower or your base has a different health level that you're gonna sustain damage to. There's no way to avoid it. This game is all about survival. You're gonna endure the onslaught of attacks from all these enemies, and you gotta outlast them for 9 rounds. And if you outlast them for 9 rounds and the health of your base is at least 1, then you have won the game. Now, this game has some really cool, neat features from a deck building perspective. For example, players are accruing every round. They freely accrue some currency, some money that goes straight into their hands. And then as the game progresses, they're getting higher denominations of those currencies for free as well. So it keeps the game balanced as far as you having enough money to purchase things. And also, when you buy something, when you buy different characters or different items or weapons, they become available to you right then and there. They don't go to your discard pile to be used on a future turn. They go into your hand and you use them right there. And since this is a cooperative game, you're playing with other people, you can purchase a card and give it to another player if it's more beneficial to them. Again, really cool, neat concepts from a cooperative and a deck building perspective, but I just can't figure it out from a successful perspective. I cannot win at this game. I've only made it to the 9th round once, and you have to survive the 9th round to win. So of all the times I played, I've only even come close 1 time. Quite often I'm losing and being eliminated in the 7th round. Every so often I can't even make it to the 7th round. And yet, for whatever reason, I really enjoy this game. I enjoy the process of trying to figure it out. I enjoy the process of trying to get those different items, those different weapons, those armors, different cards to add to my different units, my different troops. Just such a fun experience, enjoyable thematically speaking, but I cannot win at this game for my life. Number 2 board game that I absolutely suck at, Xenoshyft. And now we move on to my number 1. My number 1 absolute game that I suck at most, and that is Clank, a deck building adventure. My number 1 game I suck at, and this is a very popular deck building game, a gateway style game. So from that perspective, from learning this game, I had no problem. This game is really easy to learn, really easy to teach. I've taught it to several people. My problem with this game is the success in actually winning it. I don't think I've ever won this game, and I've played 2 players a good amount of times, and I've played multiplayers a good amount of times, and I've never won at this game. I think I've had times where I've competed, where I've come close, where I've deceived myself into thinking that I would do well at this game and come short. I don't understand it. And what's really cool and really interesting, common image here, is that lots of the games on this list happen to be deck building games and 2-player tactical card games. And these are 2 styles of games that I really like. A few of the others that don't fall into those groups, Pursuit of Happiness and Robinson Crusoe, worker placement games, another mechanism or category that I like. But for whatever reason, I can't do well at these games. You know, I always have such a fun experience though playing Clank. Clank is one of those games that even if you do not win, you can absolutely have a good time. I feel like even if you're playing a 4-player game and you're last place, you can have a good time. I like Clank because you're managing 3 different currencies, and usually your typical deck builder might have 1 or even 2 currencies that you manage, but this game adds a third currency you're managing. You're using your influence in order to purchase more cards. You're using your swords or your attack in order to defeat different monsters or traverse different pathways through the board. And ultimately, finally, you're using your boots, which are perhaps the most important symbol of the game, the most important currency, because those boots are what allow you to move from space to space, because this deck building game adds a board, and the board is not superfluous at all because the board actually involves a spatial maneuvering, a spatial element to it. You're manipulating and moving throughout these different rooms in the board and throughout the dungeon in order to get all of these different items and treasures, keys, backpacks, and every time you get some artifacts, which are the most powerful and valuable items in this game, you awaken the dragon and increase his wrath and his rage. And basically, the dragon is an artificial intelligence of sorts that attacks the players every so often, and we randomly draw cubes based on the amount of clank, as the name indicates, the amount of noise that players made throughout the game by playing some weak cards from their deck. And we draw randomly from a bag and see which cubes come out, and each of these cubes that come out in a player's color assigns damage to that player. And the player, once their health has hit 10, they're eliminated from this game, which is such a cool element because sometimes the player who looks like they're running away with the game as far as victory points are concerned ends up being eaten and destroyed by the dragon, and now the game is up for grabs and all the other players are still racing to be the first player to climb to the top of the castle in order to get that bonus reward. Really cool, lots of neat things going on, but again, I just don't understand why I can't win at this game. My number 1 board game that I absolutely suck at, Clank. And that's it for today's list, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. Please comment down below. Tell me which of these games you would crush me at because of how good you are at them. Also, tell me down below if there's any games that you are willing to admit. Swallow your pride and admit that you suck at them too. I'm interested in reading what you guys have to say. This is Harry saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.